These are 10 games so ridiculously good they're guaranteed to knock your grandma's socks clean off. I'd like to apologize in advance for the sheer volume of corny, elderly jokes you're about to endure. Let's go. Coming in at number 10 is Absolum, a game that looks like someone took an old school arcade beat 'em up, fed it several decades of technological advancement, and handed it a sword the size of a commercial refrigerator. It takes that familiar side-scrolling formula and makes it look, sound, and play far more spectacularly than Grandma ever expected. The hand-drawn fantasy artwork is immediately striking, so Nana won't even need to adjust her bifocals. The attacks feel responsive, weighty, and deeply satisfying, like landing the winning stamp on a bingo card. You can launch enemies, bounce them off walls, hurl them into each other, and chain together elaborate combos. Better yet, the combat has real defensive depth. Dodge toward an attack at the last second, and you can deflect it. Time your own strike against an incoming blow, and you trigger a clash, stunning the enemy and opening them up for pure punishment. You also get 4 distinct playable characters: Galandra, an elven warrior with the comically oversized sword, Carl, a heavily armed dwarf bruiser, Cider, a lightning-fast mechanical thief, and Brome, a spellcasting frog who Grandma says is the reason she has genital warts. Every run creates new build possibilities through magical rituals, mounts, companions, trinkets, and temporary upgrades. Pair all of that with the excellent soundtrack and lavish presentation, and this feels like the Gone with the Wind of arcade fighters. The roguelike structure can make the early hours a little repetitive, and some of the best abilities have to be unlocked during each run, but once their combat opens up, Absolum becomes fast, stylish, technical, and incredibly satisfying. Grandma might not understand permanent meta progression, but she will understand a dwarf firing a shotgun while an elf launches 6 goblins across the screen. That's number 10, Absolum. Next up is number 9, Heroes of Might and Magic, Olden Era. A fantasy strategy game specifically engineered to make you say, I'll play one more turn until Grandma finds you unconscious at 4 in the morning with mashed potatoes still on your shirt. You guide your heroes across enormous maps, collecting resources, capturing towns, finding magical artifacts, and building armies filled with knights, skeletons, vampires, dragons, murderous insects, and whatever the hell that Lovecraftian faction is supposed to be. When those armies collide, combat moves to a hex-based battlefield where positioning, spells, unit abilities, and tactical decisions can let a smaller force defeat a much larger one. There are 6 distinct factions, branching unit upgrades, dozens of heroes, and enough army building possibilities to keep Grandma occupied until the nursing home files a missing persons report. The colorful maps are packed with things to discover, and watching a tiny settlement grow into a magnificent fantasy stronghold is dangerously satisfying. Now, it isn't perfect. The interface can be confusing, neutral battles eventually become repetitive, and newcomers may spend their first few hours wondering what half the numbers actually mean. But once everything clicks, Olden Era delivers one of the strongest just one more turn loops in modern strategy gaming. Grandma may not understand morale, initiative, or magical focus, but she understands raising an army of undead monsters and wiping the neighbors off the map. That's number 9, Heroes of Might and Magic, Olden Era. Next up is Wildermyth, a turn-based fantasy RPG that lets you create a group of completely ordinary people and then ruin their lives for your entertainment. Your heroes begin as farmers, dreamers, and local nobodies, but over the course of a campaign they fall in love, become rivals, lose limbs, grow old, have children, transform into elemental monsters, and occasionally sacrifice themselves to save everyone else. It's basically Grandma's family photo album, except the divorce arguments are replaced by tactical combat against giant lizards. The story unfolds through a charming paper cutout comic book style, with choices that genuinely affect your characters and their relationships. Friends protect each other, lovers become furious when their partner's attacked, and rivals compete to land the biggest hit. Combat plays like a friendlier fantasy version of XCOM. Warriors hold the line, hunters attack from range, and mystics weaponize the environment by exploding furniture, hurling rocks, and turning household objects into magical death traps. So Grandma's been training for this her entire life. The best part is that surviving heroes can enter your legacy and return in later campaigns, carrying their history with them. Some events eventually repeat, and 3 classes can feel slightly limiting, but those flaws barely matter once you become emotionally attached to a one-legged fire wizard named Harold. That's Wildermyth, the only game where Grandma can watch an entire family age, retire, and die before she finishes telling you what happened at the pharmacy. Next up is Nine Kings, a roguelike kingdom builder where you place cards, build an army, and then sit back while hundreds of tiny lunatics beat the hell out of each other. You begin with a small 3x3 kingdom and choose where to place troops, towers, support buildings, and your royal base. Every round represents another year, and once your cards are played, the battle begins automatically. Each king has a different deck and strategy. One focuses on gold, another on magic, another on demons, nature, towers, or overwhelming numbers. The real fun comes from stealing cards from rival kings and combining their abilities into completely ridiculous builds. Maybe you create one unstoppable paladin surrounded by support buildings, maybe you flood the battlefield with demons, or maybe you construct a tower so powerful the numbers eventually stop looking like numbers and start looking like Grandma's prescriptions list. A standard run lasts 33 years, but surviving lets you continue into an endless mode where the enemies become increasingly absurd until the game finally decides you've had enough happiness. It can rely a little too heavily on luck, and some runs are doomed before they properly begin, but matches are short, the pixel art is charming, and experimenting with broken combinations is incredibly addictive. Grandma may not understand deck synergy, but she understands placing a poison cauldron next to the house of somebody she doesn't like. That's 9 kings. Next up is Viractal, Will You Trust Your Party? A game where you wake up in a creepy room, discover a mysterious board game, and immediately decide to play it instead of calling the police. You pulled into the miniature world of Viractalia, where dice determine how far you move, and cards determine whether you survive what's waiting when you get there. Every run generates a different board filled with battles, hazards, treasure, strange events, and party members who may either save your life or completely ruin your afternoon. It's basically family game night at Grandma's house. The combat is turn-based and driven by a deck you build along the way. You can focus on heavy attacks, defense, healing, or abilities that work with specific companions. Since the dice control your movement, though, a perfectly designed plan can still collapse because the game rolled a 2 and dumped you directly into hell. The full release also adds a combined adventure called Memories of the Journey, a new kobold character named Moogie, and the ability to transfer items between separated party members. The biggest weakness is that movement can feel overly dependent on luck, and some generated boards are more interesting than others. But the mixture of roguelike deck building, RPG decisions, party dynamics, and literal board game mechanics give Viractal an identity all its own. Grandma may not trust her party, but she definitely trusts the dice she keeps hidden in her purse. That's Viractal. Will you trust your party? Next up is Tunic, an isometric action-adventure starring an adorable little fox who wakes up on a beach with no weapon, no instructions, and absolutely no idea what the hell is going on. At first, it looks like a charming tribute to the original Legend of Zelda. You explore a colorful world, discover hidden paths, fight monsters, solve puzzles, and slowly collect the tools needed to reach previously inaccessible areas. Then, Tunic reveals its greatest trick. The instruction manual is hidden inside the game. You collect its pages piece by piece, gradually uncovering maps, controls, item descriptions, handwritten clues, and mechanics that were available the entire time. You simply didn't know they existed. Most of the manual is written in a fictional language, turning the game into one enormous archaeological puzzle. Every diagram, symbol, and suspicious line in the environment might contain the answer to a secret you didn't even realize you were looking for. Combat blends sword attacks, shields, stamina management, dodge rolls, bombs, and magic with some surprisingly brutal enemies and bosses. That difficulty can become frustrating, and the game occasionally hides essential routes so well that finding them feels less like exploration and more like attempting to read the developer's mind. But for patient players, Tunic is packed with brilliant discoveries, layered puzzles, and secrets buried beneath other secrets. Grandma might not be able to decipher the ancient language, but she has spent 60 years interpreting Grandpa's mumbling, so she's already overqualified. That's Tunic. Next up is Blocky Dungeon, a game that takes Tetris, shoves it into a dungeon crawler, and somehow makes the whole thing work. Instead of exploring a dungeon someone else designed, you build it yourself by dropping tetramino-shaped rooms into place. Every block creates new corridors, walls, enemies, treasure, and potential ways to accidentally trap your own knight. Once a piece lands, the enemies move, so every placement is both a puzzle decision and the end of a turn. You have to think about where your knight can travel, how much stamina each move will cost, and whether the next block is about to turn your carefully planned dungeon into a medieval traffic accident. Combat is where the systems really start feeding into each other. You can fight monsters directly, chain attacks from weaker enemies into stronger ones, or clear complete lines to wipe out entire sections of the board. But line clears also build up a curse that drains your health, so the game never lets one strategy solve everything. There are objective-based quests, an endless survival mode, charming chunky visuals, and enough interacting mechanics to keep the premise interesting after the initial novelty wears off. The downside is that several rules are poorly explained, the learning curve is steeper than it first appears, and endless mode eventually becomes more punishing than strategic. Grandma may not understand dungeon architecture, but after 40 years of packing leftovers into the refrigerator, she already knows how to fill every available square. That's Blocky Dungeon. Coming in at number 3 is Saving Bumblebrook, a solo strategy card game about driving a corrupt mayor out of town without ever raising a sword. It immediately stands out in an ocean of card games, all trying to become the next Slay the Spire or Magic the Gathering. Instead of building a deck around combat, you collect different recruits, assemble the right crews, and complete pranks to push the mayor towards his breaking point. Every prank requires a specific combination of recruit types, but completing one also forces you to place wanted posters onto a 4x4 investigation board. Place a poster over a matching recruit, and then that recruit is arrested, but the poster is removed, freeing that space on the board. That turns the wanted board into a constantly evolving puzzle. You want to fill as few empty spaces as possible, deliberately send recruits to jail, break them back out, and repeat the process without allowing either the board or the jail to fill completely. However, your new posters must always be placed along the row, column, or diagonal containing the most empty spaces. Rather than simply choosing the safest move, you have to manipulate the board so the most dangerous placement becomes the one you actually want. That would be difficult enough on its own, but you also have Barnaby Bristle, an unpredictable AI ally who recruits his own crews and completes pranks alongside you. He wants to oust the mayor too, he just has no interest in following your carefully constructed plan. Every clever placement buys you another turn, and sometimes that one extra turn is all you need to send the mayor over the edge. Grandma may not understand advanced board state management, but she absolutely understands humiliating a local politician until he finally leaves town. That's number 3, Saving Bumblebrook. Next up is Journey, a game about crossing an enormous desert toward a distant mountain with almost no dialogue, no traditional combat, and only the faintest explanation of who you are or why you're going there. The controls are remarkably simple. You move, glide through the air using the energy stored in your scarf, and communicate through a musical chime. But somewhere along the way, you may encounter another traveler. They aren't an NPC, they're a real player, chosen anonymously by the game. You can't speak to them, see their username, or invite a friend. All you can do is chirp, travel together, and decide whether this complete stranger is worth waiting for when the road becomes difficult. That simple idea transforms a quiet adventure into something unexpectedly emotional. The golden deserts, ancient ruins, rushing sand, and frozen mountain landscapes remain visually stunning, while Austin Wintory's dynamic soundtrack rises and falls alongside the journey itself. It only takes a few hours to finish, and its puzzles and platforming are deliberately uncomplicated. The point isn't defeating a villain or mastering a complicated system, it's the experience of traveling, struggling, losing what helped you fly, and continuing toward the mountain anyway. Few games demonstrate more clearly how movement, music, scenery, and another human presence can tell a story without saying a single word. Grandma may not know who the mysterious traveler beside her is, but after 3 hours of silent companionship, she'll have already added them to the will. That's Journey. Taking the number 1 spot is Spirit of the North 2. A beautiful open-world adventure where you play as a lone fox exploring the remains of a civilization that vanished long before you arrived. There is almost no dialogue. Instead, the story emerges through the world itself. Abandoned strongholds, collapsed settlements, ancient skeletons, scattered journals, and quiet visions of the lives that once occupied these forgotten places. Where the original game followed a more linear path, the sequel gives you an expansive wilderness filled with distant landmarks, hidden ruins, environmental puzzles, ancient temples, and fragments of history waiting to be uncovered. Magical runes gradually expand what your fox can do, granting abilities such as gliding and astral projection, while opening routes that once seemed completely inaccessible. But the world itself is the reason Spirit of the North 2 takes the top spot. Aurora-lit forests glow beneath the night sky, mist rolls through the shattered ruins, sunlight breaks across mountains, caves descend into darkness, storms reshape the atmosphere, and the changing day-night cycle can make familiar locations feel entirely new. There are long stretches where nothing is demanding your attention, no dialogue box appears, no objective marker screams at you. You simply run through the wilderness with your raven companion while the music, scenery, and remains of a lost civilization tell the story around you. The movement, puzzle feedback, and demanding boss encounters can occasionally undermine that tranquility, but they never completely erase the beauty of the journey. At its best, Spirit of the North 2 creates something increasingly rare. A game that makes you slow down, stop chasing the next reward, and simply exist inside its world for a while. Grandma may struggle with the boss fights, but she has spent decades clipping coupons, so her inventory management skills are genuinely terrifying. That's number 1, Spirit of the North 2. That's it. Grandma's socks are gone, and this video is over.